Now let's talk about this Ole Miss football game. We're going to start off with a little bit of an opponent breakdown, get a little bit of a idea of who Ole Miss is this season versus what they were last year. Right now, this is the only team with an SEC win. They were the only game that's played in the SEC so far. Ole Miss versus Kentucky last week. Like I said earlier, 30-23. Ole Miss got that win. But this team's changed a lot, and if any team utilizes the transfer portal as much as they do, it's really Ole Miss. So many different transfers coming in. We'll just start on the offensive side of the football. Kawan Lacey, he was a guy that came in from Missouri last year. Harrison Wallace III, a receiver from Penn State. Dazon Stribling, another player for them, a receiver from Oklahoma State. He's been in previous spots on the offense. And like many of us know, several players from Arkansas are on this football team on the offensive side, including Patrick Kutas and Luke Has. And Luke Has is hurt and he won't be playing in this game. But I think there's going to be some extra motivation from the Razorbacks, given that three of those guys, we'll talk about the other one later, decided to transfer to Ole Miss. So that's a really big deal. But let's talk about the quarterback position for them. Jackson Dart was there for so long and was really the guy Kiffin had brought up in this Ole Miss offense and who most Arkansas fans know as the quarterback of Ole Miss the last several years. But there's a new guy in there, and that's going to be Austin Simmons. And where he looks to go and his outlook as a pro potentially in the future, that'll be we'll see what that's going to end up being. But for right now, Simmons is clearly just not as impressive as Jackson Dart, and that's going to be as expected. So he's a guy right now, 576 passing yards through 2 games. It's almost 300 a game. 3 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. A lot of those yards came in that first game, 341 yards, and all three of those touchdowns came in the Georgia State game. So he had 0 touchdowns, 2 picks, and barely over 50% completion against Kentucky. So I expect us to see a little bit more of those stats, assuming our defense plays well. But I don't think Simmons will be as impressive as Dart was. Obviously, they killed us last year. This was a game we got ran through on 63-31 last year. But outside of that game, and I'm sure Kiffin would speak to this, is Ole Miss has really been tested and challenged against Arkansas. Arkansas has definitely given them their money's worth. And in fact, they've won football games against Lane Kiffin. So we definitely know we have it in us. We'll see if it happens this weekend. But running game, I mentioned him earlier, Kawan Lacey. He has 246 yards, and that's of their 515. So almost half of their offense on the ground is from Kawan Lacey. Simmons is a guy who won't really run the football a ton. He just has 61 yards through 2 games. He's not necessarily a Taylor Green style quarterback where he's going to really use his dual threat ability. He's going to use it to stay mobile in the pocket and get out of place. But he's not. They're not going to design runs for him as much as Taylor gets design runs. And then the receivers, and that's where there's been a lot of turnover. If you looked, I mean, if you keep up with the NFL draft or even college football, you'll know that a lot of their guys over the last several years since Lane Kiffin's been there have gone to the NFL. But specifically, Trey Harris was a second-round pick to the Chargers. Jordan Watkins was ultimately drafted probably off the game he had against the Razorbacks because I believe he had 4 touchdowns in that game. So we single-handedly got Jordan Watkins drafted to the 49ers. And then I believe even another guy for their team, Antwain Wells Jr., Juice Wells, was another guy that probably was on a practice squad right now. So they had several players on this team. Caden Preeksorn, their tight end, was also a guy who was talked about in draft circles. So a lot of their pass catchers were very notable names in the draft market. So looking at this team now, a lot of turnover. We talked about it, Harrison Wallace III is their main receiver who's really shown up this year. 247 receiving yards. The next closest receiver has 85. So they're going to really highlight him. But he's only done it on 9 catches, which is still the leading team's receiver, but 6 is what the next guy has. So it's not that far as much as the yards are. So he's had 27 yards per catch, which is crazy. He has 1 touchdown. Several other guys have touchdown receptions. Daquan Wright's really their starting tight end. And then Dazon Stribling's another receiver that I mentioned earlier. So they're going to have several pass catchers. It's not necessarily to me as dominant as like a Trey Harris was last year. But Harrison Wallace III, looking at him on their roster, 6'1", 200, a senior guy from Penn State. I think he's going to be probably the biggest guy. I'll be interested to see who Pittman has on him. Last week, obviously, we played a top tier, I believe, wide receiver in Corey Rucker. And I feel like that Pittman and the defense really held him in check. Like for him, and I'm looking it up right now, Corey Rucker had 3 catches for 20 yards and he had 9 targets. So the defense played really well on him. I think we had various dudes on him. It wasn't just like one guy all the time, but I know Kenai Walker was on there a lot. And I think he ultimately proved to be a real big transfer in that game. So That's really a lot of the offense. Their offensive line's a little made over. They've got a couple different guys, but overall they have a pretty solid offensive line. Nothing crazy in my opinion. But that is really a lot of their offense. Their defense is where we'll talk about some really key guys, in my opinion. We'll start on the D line, specifically Princewell Umanmielen. So if anybody's heard of Princely Umanmielen, he was a second round pick for Ole Miss last year. He was on their team. This is his brother. He transferred in from Nebraska. He's an impressive player. Suntarine Perkins, a guy who's kind of a hybrid linebacker edge guy. I know we've played those type of guys like Harold Perkins, and he wrecked us. So watch for Perkins to be a guy that Petrino's going to be really trying to keep and make plays on the opposite side of where he is at. So Perkins is a guy for them that's really impressive. Another guy in their defense, and this is on the secondary side, is Jalen Braxton. He's a guy that transferred in from our team, the Razorbacks, who was out most of the year last year, so he didn't even really play against Ole Miss. But he elected to transfer. He really kind of sat out towards the end of the season for us. So right now he's questionable. I don't know if he'll go in this game, but it'll be really intriguing to see how our players react to him being on the defensive side of the football for Ole Miss. But really, Perkins and Princewell Monmeal, and I'm going to get numbers on them. So as a fan, you can participate and try to keep an eye on who these guys are. Amon Mielen's number one, and Suntarine Perkins is number four. And like I've said on the show before, like those single digit guys are usually single digit players for a reason. Braxton also number two, just for context as well. But that's really a lot of their defensive players. This is a team that I don't believe hangs their hat on their defense. Kentucky was probably considered one of the worst offensive teams going into this season, and they still scored 23 against Ole Miss. And I know Calzada got hurt at the end of that game as well. So could they have put up more? I'm not sure. But Kentucky had their way a little bit with Ole Miss. 172 yards on the ground. Their leading rusher had 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. Calzada, like I said, he did get hurt, but he had 149 passing yards. Their pass defense could be better than their run defense against Georgia State. It's kind of hard to tell, but they gave up 191 rushing yards and 69 passing yards. So it seems like this is a game where it's going to feature, at least for us, probably more heavy emphasis on the run game. I'll be interested to see uh, who we emphasize in the running game or in the passing game on offense. Is it going to be more running backs, or is it going to be some design runs like we saw against Arkansas State with Taylor Green? That's going to be remain to be seen. But that's a little bit about Ole Miss and who they are. 2-0 team, and like I mentioned, this is a team that's 17 in the country right now. So with an opportunity to play them in their house in Oxford and get a win, this really could mean a lot for the Hogs. And I would assume if we were to get a win here, we would be a potentially ranked team. I think we would be, but you never know with how the rest of the games shake out. If there's bigger upsets than us, maybe we get passed over. But I think if we're able to win this football game, that's definitely in the cards. But let's switch over to the offensive side of the football, talk the Hogs. Phenomenal game last week against the Red Wolves, and we're hoping to carry that into this week against the Rebels. But let's talk about what I think we could see from our offense potentially this week against Ole Miss. I mentioned it. Their defense seems a little more susceptible to the run. They've lost guys in their run defense. So I'm looking at a really big game from Braylon Russell. So each week we've talked about this on this show. The Alabama A&M game, I projected just like two players. Hey, you need to watch these guys on each side of the football. And I talked about Taylor Green. I talked about C.J. Brown. They both had very impressive games, right? Taylor Green, not that hot of a take, but still decided, he's going to have a good game. This last game against Arkansas State, I did the same thing. Taylor Green, Mike Washington Jr., both had phenomenal games. We're just going to do one this week to keep it real simple. But this is my guy to watch, and that's going to be Braylon Russell. So the offensive player to watch, Braylon Russell, the running back. He didn't really do too much in this game against Arkansas State. 5 carries, 25 yards. He did have a touchdown. This is a guy where I'm really just betting on what I've seen from Ole Miss's defense, which shows to be a little more susceptible against the run. So that includes Washington and Russell, right? So I'm looking at the running back room already. Washington had a good game against Arkansas State, but if I'm looking at the snap count and specifically their carry numbers, 18 right now for Mike Washington Jr. and 16 for Braylon Russell. Now Russell's carries went down; he went from 11 to 5. Washington's went same. He was 9 first game, 9 second game. I think that if Russell's able to just prove that he's able to get steady yardage. That's the thing against teams like Alabama A&M and Arkansas State. The big play always wins, right? The big play players are the ones that are going to show out the most because you're in a spot where you're kind of almost trying to try out new things. You're not just trying to get 5 yards on a running play. That's what Russell provides. Russell provides consistency. Russell provides physicality. He's not an easily tackleable player. So that's really helpful. I mean, he's a dude that's 6'1", 240. So not an easy guy to tackle. So I think if we emphasize the run, Braylon Russell is going to be the recipient of that. So I'm really projecting for him to have a big game. Let's switch over to the defense and let's talk about how well we played this past weekend. 14 points given up to the Red Wolves, 7 of those really on the defensive side of the football. A lot of guys played well. We talked about that. Let's see what we're going to do against Ole Miss. So, like I said, they're a fairly balanced team. 635 passing yards, 515 rushing yards. They're going to look to do both. But I'm really looking for our pass defense to really show up here in our defensive line. And if you follow the show at all, you'll know that like those are the two main pillars to me of the defense. And that's no knock on the linebacking core because we have phenomenal linebackers. But it really is going to be about getting Simmons off his platform, getting to the passer and making him make a play. And in that, he's going to be forced to throw the football. And what's our defensive back room going to do? They're going to be able to each help each other out if the defensive back room is able to hold receivers to their routes and be able to keep them really shut down. They're going to give more time for the defensive line to get after the quarterback, and vice versa. If the defensive line is able to get quick there quicker, the defensive back room doesn't have to work as hard. So it's kind of going to be in lock and step. We're going to see how they play off of each other. But a couple guys that I'll mention before I've got my guy to watch on those two respective units. Defensive line, Quincy Rhodes Jr. has been having a phenomenal season. I'm excited to see him get after the passer. And then Cam Ball, another guy on the defensive line who's just rock steady. Number 5, a captain. He's a guy that's just played so much football. I'm excited to see him. And then in the defensive back room, I'm excited to see 2 guys in particular. And that's Larry Worth III and Jaheim Singletary. And I'll explain why. Both of these players, I think, are 2 of the few guys that are returning on this team. Miguel Mitchell's another guy as well, that were on this team last year. And this defense got embarrassed last year. Like I said, 63 points were given up. So I think it's going to be an emphasis for these guys to really play well. And then another note for Singletary specifically. This is a guy who I was not impressed with. I talked about this on Saturday. He did not play well. He had, I believe, back-to-back penalties on a drive. He wasn't listed as a starter going into the A&M game, and he hasn't been listed since. He got his job taken by Kenai Walker and Julian Neal, and I think he's going to be extra motivated. So if he gets in there, having an embarrassing performance last year against Ole Miss, and having the opportunity to maybe just try to get his job back to some extent, I think he's going to be. We're going to see right here what he's made of and how well he plays in this football game. So defensive line, defensive backs, those are the rooms I'm really looking at. But like I mentioned, I'm still a fan of this linebacker room, and that's why my defensive player to watch is Xavier Sorey Jr. If you watched last week's episode, this was another guy I mentioned as well. I mentioned him and Larry Worth. And I'm going to mention him again because he, 1, having a phenomenal game against Arkansas State, but 2, that same component of just he was on this team last year. This team gave up so many points. Revenge is just, to me, an underrated motivation for a lot of these players, right? I think they still have to have good defensive schemes, good offensive schemes, like whoever you're going against, there's still got to be the football aspect of it. But if we talk about the emotional aspect of it, to have that be so prevalent against a team, I know the Razorbacks hate. I know they thought they got embarrassed last year, giving up 63 points. I know Sorey's going to be so excited to play this football game. I'm excited to see that energy. And for Ole Miss, too, another thing I'll mention, they play Tulane next week, which shouldn't be a look ahead game, but at the same time, you should make the argument Tulane's as good as the Razorbacks. Tulane beat a Power 4 school that first week against Northwestern. So I think, and LSU follows. So those 2 games, like I said, Tulane's probably not that competitive of a game, but LSU in 2 weeks. So if there's any look ahead, we'll see. Obviously, Ole Miss too got the best of us last year. So if there's any sort of settling on that win last year and being maybe more content than you would be with a less impressive performance, we'll see if that also happens. But we talked about the grades from the Arkansas State football game, right? We talked about the players to watch. Let's look at Braylon Russell and let's look at Xavier Sorey for this upcoming week against Ole Miss. I'm excited to see them both play. Another note on Russell, he only had 2 yards. I was looking this up earlier. 2 yards against the Ole Miss Rebels last year on 4 carries. So I think he's going to have motivation. As a guy who played well towards the end of the season, I think he's going to have motivation to have a good football game against Ole Miss. But really, this is the main part of the show, especially going into a game, is what do I ultimately think will be the score? Do I think we're able to win this football game in Oxford? If you watch that first week, we talked about the predictions for this season, and I had the Razorbacks going fairly conservative take, but I had them going 6-6, 3-5 in the conference, right? And one of the losses I had them losing was this game against Ole Miss. I figured they'd be a ranked football team. This was a team that we struggled with last year. I know we've had the number of times, but this is a difficult team to play against. But I'm going to revoke that prediction, and I'm ultimately going to be picking us to defeat the Ole Miss Rebels this weekend, 27-24 in Oxford, 6 o'clock primetime television on ESPN. And I ultimately think that there's two things, if I'm looking at as a Hogs fan, that if I see this, I ultimately think we can win this football game. And that's consistency in the run game. It's not necessarily big play abilities. I think that if we get that, that's awesome. But it's consistent ability to move the football. And to me, that's like 4 yards or more. If we're able to consistently run the football around 4 yards or more with Russell, with Washington, like I said, I think Russell will be a good player in this game. But those two guys, and even Taylor Green in the mix as well, I think that's going to feed off of everything. Like if we're able to do that, we're able to run RPOs, run play action passes, where Taylor Green's able to get outside, use his legs, make the plays outside of the tackle box. And I think that's going to be really helpful for us. If we're able to run the football, I think that really vitalizes and really like boosts this offense. And then on the defensive side, the keynote here to me is being able to get home, um, specifically on non-designed pass rush plays, and really trusting in a guy like Quincy Rhodes Jr., trusting in a guy like Cam Ball, trusting in a guy like Philip Lee, who had a good game against Arkansas State as well, and those guys to get home and really provide for our defensive back room. Like I said, they have a whole new receiving corps, but these are still talented players that played at the Power Four level for other teams and have shown to play well so far this year against quality opponent, at least in Kentucky last week. So if we're able to get home to me on non-designed pass rush plays, and we're able to really settle in and be consistent with the run, I think we can ultimately win this football game. And I think this is a real turning moment. Like if we were able to win this football game, like I said, I think we have the opportunity to be ranked. We're going to be going into Memphis the following week, but this is really key game. So ultimately, I have us winning 27-24.